today I'm very specifically going to talk about Power Automate, one of my favorite features, and pretty much one of the features that many of our customers have been asking for. So when Power Automate and SharePoint triggers were announced like 3 years back, we basically had the two most common triggers when an item is created, and then when an item is created or modified. And basically, if you wanted to focus on running a flow or running a workflow, when something was modified in a list, you had to depend on when an item is created or modified, and people had to go through several hacks to understand how to determine the particular flow run was based on an item creation or based on an item modification, which threw tantrums to a lot of folks, and quite frankly, it didn't help me as well as a PM working on the product to go build some of the awesome things that we can build using Power Automate and SharePoint. So obviously, we had this user voice item that actually is one of the top user voice items right now that talks about it would be nice to have a trigger if a certain column in a SharePoint that is modified, and also to understand what column was modified, right? That's also one of the typical things you would want to do. In this case, from the user voice item, we can see that if the status column is modified or if the assigned to is modified, so then you could go and make something that is very particular to your business scenario when things get modified in the list. So it took a long for us, but I'm happy to announce that this is now available to everyone. And if you go to this user voice link, I have also given instructions on what is available. When I come back from vacation, yes, I am on vacation, and just I love Vesa so much, and of course the community here. So I just came out of my vacation for this hour to deliver this session. But when I come back from vacation next week, it will be documented as well in our Power Automate documentation portal to drive the scenario with an example. So the scenario is really simple. Something got modified. I want to know what got modified, and then get the current value, and then go about doing my workflow, building my workflow. So let's first go into where you can find this in your tenant if you go to Power Automate website. So if you go to Power Automate website and create a flow, and if you choose the SharePoint for your trigger, you should be able to see when an item or file is modified. So one of the things we did simplify this time is we have one trigger, and you could choose the trigger to target either a list or a library. So you don't have to go find another trigger for file. So for example, here I can say, the site address, it comes up. There you go. And then I could say, here's the list or library name, right? So you can see that I have both list and library name here. So it gives me all of the libraries and lists available. So it's not very particular to list. It's not very particular library. So you can choose one in the same trigger, which I find is a very good direction going forward. You will see us making this change across the triggers, so we don't confuse customers, and you have one trigger, you can keep changing between the list and library. So once you do this, you have the other options as well, the folder, and even if you want to just pick the columns that you want. Say, for example, if you have more than 12 lookup columns, that won't work because of the threshold we have. So you could choose a particular view to bring very specific columns back. So this trigger will give you the ability to run only when items are modified in that particular list I have selected here. Now, there's also a new action available that is called Get Changes. So get changes for an item or a file. And again, here it targets both item or a file. And in the case of file, as the name suggests, it's only about the properties and not about the content. So when you think about this is the second question to the riddle, right? So, okay, something got modified. What got modified, right? So that's something I want to understand. So now you could say, well, I'm looking at the site called List Experiences and Asset Manager. So I'm going to just select the same thing here, asset manager, and for the ID. So I can choose the ID from the trigger. So then it gives me whether it's a file or an item. The ID is consistent. I can get back the item or the file that are associated with it. And then you have an interesting two options, since and until. So you're getting changes for a particular item. You can specify the time interval because this is a workflow, and things get executed at certain point in time. Changes happen at certain point in time in SharePoint, and then changes happen at certain point in time in Power Automate, meaning that the run could be later than change happened in SharePoint, maybe 5 minutes or 15 minutes. So you would want to understand what is the change happened for this particular item since a time interval. Now, you could go and manage your own time interval here, but we thought that would be really bad for users. So the when an item or file is modified trigger comes with tokens that you can use in place for the since and until properties in this action, meaning that the trigger knows when it was last checked. When did it last check for the flow run or for item modifications. Using that, you could depend your business logic to go with the flow logic of when it checks for modifications with the SharePoint list. So if you go through the dynamic property here and actually scroll at the bottom, let me just do this. So it says for token, you will get trigger window start token and trigger window end token. So since is basically trigger window start, so at what time you want to start, and then the until is trigger window end token. So now this will make sure that your action is checking for changes between that interval of time, and here the interval time is whatever the Power Automate connector checked with SharePoint. What was the last time? When was the last time it checked, and what is the interval? If you are not very familiar with this, how to handle it, just look at the documentation and put these two values in, and you will be using the out-of-the-box way of handling interval times. If you are someone that is very keen to manage this within yourself, you have the power to go do it, to manage the specific intervals you want, and using those specific intervals to get changes. Now, one thing this action requires is the ability to understand that something was changed. And that does not come for free, right? Because we need a way to track all of the different changes that happens in that particular list. So to do that, this action requires versioning turned on. So that's the only caveat here. And we have this in the right there in the information icon. If you click on it, it'll actually give you that this must have versioning. The list must have versioning turned on. Now, there's also another important thing here. Because it depends on versioning, that directly correlates to how farther can you go back. If you just have only one item to be stored as versioning, then you can only go one n-1, right? If you have 5 versions stored, you can go n-5. So that's the important thing here. But again, this is something that you can configure for your list and understand what is really needed based on your business process, and then bring it to your workflow and do the same. So that's the gist of the feature. You have when an item or file is modified, and then when you have get changes for an item action that can actually go and figure out what is the change that happened. Now, one of the things, if you open Show Advanced option, is we have some interesting option there, which is include minor versions. So, most of the time, the major version is considered as the version that is available to all users in a given list. But sometimes you might have business logic that you want to apply on minor versions as well. But do understand that if you choose to do that, you should have some issue. The workflow should be running in the context of someone that has access to minor versions and can read minor versions out from the list. So The default option for this is include minor versions. It does not include minor versions. That's a no. But you can obviously change that to S. And if you are able to access the minor versions, you can go ahead and access them and the properties here. Now, so these two are done. So the next thing is, great, I built this workflow. How the heck do I know that something was changed? How is Power Automate going to help me find that? So let's go see how that is going to work here. So here, I'm going to choose the condition, right? And I want to know what properties, some of the properties that changed. And maybe in my business logic, I know exactly what I'm targeting, right? So if I check in the condition, and you can see here that I have get changes for an item or a file. And this has some interesting dynamic outputs and something that we work really brainstormed a lot to make this very easy for end users. So we have something called has column changed and then followed by the column name, right? So you can see has column changed ID, has column changed asset tag, model, serial number, purchase date, color, device photo, everything, right? And there is also a status. Now, if you're very specifically focusing on status, now what you can do is you can just say in your condition, has column change status is equal to true. That is it. That's how you can now understand that that column was changed in that specific time interval from the get changes action. So it's really, really simple. You can go to the dynamic properties, look at the format, has column changed. It's answering the question yes or no, but in terms of the programming, it's actually true or false. And then you use that in the condition and say true. Now, if you're someone that wants to get the collection and do more on your own, we have that as well. So if you actually scroll down in the dynamic properties after all of that, we actually had, I think, one of the properties as a collection. Let me see. Maybe we removed it. Yeah, there it is. Has column changed? A collection showing which columns have changed. So this is a collection. So you can also do something if your job is not about condition, but you just want to enumerate every column that has changed and do some parallel things. So for example, I can say add an action and do a switch, right? Choose a value. And I can go down here, has column changed. And then here, I can actually do more stuff by enumerating those. And I think I'm doing a little bit something wrong here, which is actually, I would do this for each. Oops. Oh, that's not for each. Apply to each. And I can do has column change.
This is, sorry, Chaks. This is virtually the same that somebody is watching behind of your back and you're trying to demo it. So there's only 250 of us in the call, so no pressure. So
yeah, this is the live demo. You can see I did not record anything.
Yeah, exactly.
And for each and apply to each just brings my my problem with low code and professional development. But for users that are actually using the tool that don't have any experience on the professional development side, we'll find apply to each much more soothing than for each. But it's just English strings at this point in time. But you can do apply to each and then go about understanding what those columns are and apply your business logic. So instead of just doing condition, you could also switch to a parallel loop now to go do that. So a lot of great options here. And again, if you're going to use the get changes action, you do need versioning turned on. which is there in the documentation, and how backwards you could go is dependent on that version and setting. And for the trigger, you don't need any versioning because trigger does not depend on versioning. It just depends on the fact that something changed in the list. So this is great. I think we have seen how to use it, but I want to show you a real demo here. So I have a list issue tracker. If you got list in your tenant, awesome. If you can try it out, the issue tracker template, that's one of the templates available out of the box with the Microsoft List app. Now, the issue tracker is great to track things in my list and have a lightweight system than depending on, let's say, a powerful, project management tool or something like that. So it's very specific to my team, my feature group. And here's an example of that. Now, at some point in time, let's say we do want to promote some of the items to, in this case, let's say Visual Studio, DevOps, Azure DevOps, and create a feature card for my engineers to now consider it as a very major item because PMs have discussed about all the issues and we have promoted an issue to Azure DevOps. Very common scenario, I think, across the board. And we see customers doing that. Now, with Power Automate, this makes it really simple, right? You could also go manually, say, select an item, and then go to Automate menu and have a flow that can actually, say, create workflow item. But that's like 1980s, right? I mean, we are in 2020, and we need something that is much more easier and predictable to go do that job. And I know from my team that if the statuses won't fix, right? If the statuses won't fix and the priority is critical, I do want the decision to now go to my engineering team to go do further investigation to see how we can unblock the issue and have a fix one or other way or proposals and brainstorming that. So I need engineering heads to go and do that. So that's the scenario here. And now with this new trigger and get changes action, I can actually go do that, right? So I can now say, hey, something got modified in this list. The status column modified. If the status column was modified, then is the priority of that item is critical. If the priority of this item is critical, then we need to create an Azure DevOps feature card in my team's project. And that's how the scenario is going to play out, right? So are you all with me still? Yep, that's the scenario. So now I'm just going to refresh this page. Most of the time, it's good if I refresh and make it the current. So I'm going to open this item. And by the way, you're seeing another demo here, which if there is time, I can go through today, or I can find time when the feature is actually released. This is the feature about formatting the header, the footer, and the body of the form so that you can have this wide view with properties under every section customized and have a header and a footer to drive some useful scenarios in the experiences that your users use the form. So it's a little distraction, but I can come and give a session about this once the feature is released. But we have been showing this feature across various webinars and demos that we're doing as part of the Microsoft List product. So here, I'm going to change the progress to, I'm going to move this. I'm going to change the progress to one fix, but I'm going to show you the flow as well here. So here it is, all of the runs, right? So I'm going to go back, change to one fix and save this. And let's see, now it's going to be a waiting game to see when this gets picked up. But this is going to get picked up in a minute, and it's going to run the flow. I see some, while we wait for this, I do see some chat messages. I'm just looking through that. Okay, so there's a question around minor version. Awesome. There's a question around, would there be a reason that the since version and until version would always return 1.0, even if the current version is 6.0? I do not know. It really depends on your versioning settings, on how this is all configured. So we don't do anything beyond that, but it may happen that since and until version are lower than the current version in the cases where flow did not check, or there are some logics that it did not appear to run. So that's why we have the since and until version for you to figure out, and the current version, Boolean value is current version in the get action changes to drive some scenarios using that. So if it's not current version, then you have some problems with the sync. So that would be another way to find that out. Let me check now. So there it is. It's running. So what this has now done is, one thing I did not show you in the flow is it actually sent me a Teams message. So it went and looked at the assigned to column in my list, and it sent a message to that user in the assigned to column, a Teams message. So here it is. Issue changed to won't fix, right? The issue blah, blah, blah was changed to won't fix, though it marked as critical. Please review and promote it as a bug. So I'm going to create a bug, and I'm going to say, we need to find a fix for this as it is important from an experience point of view. And I'm going to hit submit. Yep, that happens all the time. No need to panic. And now it actually created, it sent, and then you saw immediately I actually got a message back saying a bug was created with the Azure DevOps link here, right there. Now, if I go back to my Azure DevOps link, you can see there is the item that it just got created. And you can see that there is also user comments. We need to find a fix for this as it's important for the experience point of view. So whatever I gave in the comment has come back here. Now, one thing, if you notice here, it's very hard today to get the formatting right using Power Automate connections and actions. So that's something you would have to play around to get it right. You could even put your user comments as a discussion. But that's something I would say it's a pain that I go through every day in making sure I can format these things right in a way that I can read, users can read them. But that aside, you saw the scenario now. Item got changed, status was marked critical, and status was marked won't fix and critical, and it got created. So I'm going to delete this so I don't create any trouble to my Azure DevOps here. We can go ahead and see how the workflow works here. And I promise you, this is only going to create a Teams message and this flow only if the status column has changed and the priority is equal to critical. Here's the workflow to prove that. So when an item or file is modified, right? So I have that particular trigger, and I also have the particular action talking about get changes. And if you look at my list settings, I also have versioning turned on, which I think I will skip for now. So the first thing I check is as status column change since last check, right? So I use the status has column changed. So I go here and I selected has column change status. I check if it's true, and then I go ahead here to say if status is won't fix and priority is critical, right? Now I get the status value from the current item, right? So if I put here status, right? So I do get the status value when an item is created or modified, trigger output, because the trigger ran, and I do get the value when the trigger ran. So I do get the status value. Status is a choice column, so when you look in the Power Automate, instead of status, you do status value. And then I also check for priority. right? Priority again is a choice column, so you get a priority value. So I say status is equal to one fixed, priority is critical. Then I move on to my next block, which is yes, they are true. What am I supposed to do now? And now I can say post a choice of options as the flow bot to a user. So now I can create my own choice, create bug, ask more details, and go through the flow, issue all the, give all the values here, and then I wait for the action. And now I can then say from that, you know, waiting action that I have here, post a choice of options, because it's waiting for the option to be completed by the user. I can say select an option. If it's create bug, then I go create a work item. And now then I post a message as the flow bot to a user. Very simple, straightforward. It's exactly right you had planned in the way how I explained how this is going to work. So that is the power this trigger and action gives to now take your business workflows to the next level with item modified trigger and get changes action. So that's my demo, and that's what I wanted to share today. We do have 15 minutes. I would like to use this 15 minutes, Vesa, to answer some of the questions people may have, not just with this trigger, but also any other questions they have around Power Platform integrations. Because I think it's been a while since we had some back and forth question time for back and forth questions.
Absolutely. Yep. Yeah. Yeah. If you don't mind, you can probably keep on screen sharing if we need to show something, and then absolutely move on to questions after that. So definitely.
So I'm going through comments. There's a comment I wrote the message about since version and to version. Just notice content approval was turned on. Okay, awesome. Yeah. Again, it really comes down to your versioning settings. So make sure that the versioning settings is right, so users can get the right experience when they build workflows on top of that. In terms of licensing, there's another question. Even if you immediately exit the flow, if a specific column wasn't changed, it still counts as a one. So licensing is about API calls now. Runs do not account to licensing. So it doesn't matter if you have 1,000 runs or 1,000,000 runs, licensing does not come into effect. Licensing come into effect in the API calls and you make in the connector, whether it's to SharePoint or to any other thing. Every step is basically an API call. So that would be what accounts to licensing. And in your scenario where you exit the flow when specific column wasn't changed, if that involves get changes action, then there is one step. So that step requires an equivalent to a call. And I think the trigger is also counted for the API call. So there'll be 3 steps you would check. Now, I'm not a licensing expert, but that's something you would need to probably clarify with Power Automate team on how licensing works. But mostly you should be okay. It's not going to override or bring down the licensing just because you're checking something and then terminating from the flow. So going to next question, any plans to include item version details along with flow trigger, adding a trigger condition for based on specific column? So item version detail, we have plans for the next step for this feature is to actually give you old values and new values. That's something that's missing, right? So what's the old value? You got the new value from the trigger, but really when the change happened, what was the value of that property? So in this case, if status column changed, in that get actions, I want to get the value of the status column as well, what got changed. And if possible, give the previous version as well, the version value. That is harder for us to solve just because we have to traverse the versioning tree and give you the version details. But that's something we're working on, after the current priorities, which is basically packaging and stuff. Once that is complete, we'll come back to this and enable the scenario for getting previous value and new value along with the version details. Maybe we will also have an action that says get version details and give it the version property, version number, it will give you all the details for that particular version.
Next question. We're looking for Graph API to change flow approval actions so that we can approve reject from non-flow screen. Unfortunately, I'm not a SME on that. You might need to work with the Graph API team and Power Automate team to get that. And once that works across the board, I'm assuming it would work on a web part as well, but I'm not familiar with that area. What would be nice to have is when a specific field column is modified. So we thought about that a lot, whether we need a trigger that can eliminate the step, but the API calls everything is very expensive on our side. So costs wise, it will be an expensive thing to do. And that would also mean that for that trigger to work, you have to enable versioning. So you're stuck with the fact that the trigger itself now will require versioning on the list, even though we don't need versioning just to track modification. So we decided to split that and provide customers value in twofold. Customers that don't care about these versioning, right, that get changes, they can just use item modify. Customers that do care about getting changes, now they can add the get changes action and then make sure that versioning is turned on and whatnot. So from an experience point of view, the experience we have right now simplifies for all of the scenarios and different type of user segments. If we had gone with one trigger for like, hey, when an item is modified, and by the way, you can also say which column, confused a lot of us because from the start you have to enable versioning, otherwise even the modification won't work. And it's very also from costs wise, it is very expensive for us back and forth to go back and get things done. How does this handle check-in action? Check-in action is an update, so this flow will run for that update. Whether you check in as a minor version or a major version, that again comes down to get changes action if you're getting changes, because that would have an effect if you choose to include minor versions as well to get changes from. But anything that updates the list is considered to be in effect run the flow. I hope this is coming to Logic Apps as well. I think it will, but it won't automatically give you the out of the box running, because it's Logic Apps are based on polling. So you would have to make sure that you have that logic as well by going through the polling of the trigger. But will there be an action defining current and previous values? So I think I just answered that about previous values and current values. That's something we will add. Now, at this point, we don't have that support yet. Has anyone ever heard someone say that they are a licensing expert? True. Absolutely not. But there is someone in Microsoft that can help you. So the project here would be finding that person. But unfortunately, that's not the product team, because product team doesn't really make decisions on how business is run at Microsoft. Question here. Will there be a search for MS list in Teams app, if you know? I think there are plans across the board to make search experience consistent. So while I'm not the PM for that team, and it's a very different team altogether, I do know that there are projects and work going on to enable those experiences. And when that experience comes up, I'm pretty sure that you would be able to search within the list as well. So for example, if you're in a list, you do Control F, it goes to the search bar. When you search for something, it would search in that context. And in that context, you have the list. So that would be my guess, but I am not the PM of the feature. Hopefully that's being built. Is this available in GCC today? This should be available in GCC High, because the SharePoint connector is available and you can use that there. Is it a premium feature? It's not a premium feature. It's included in the standard features. Reza's 12 lookup threshold can be bypassed using a view in Power Automate.
Yes. So you select in the trigger or get changes action. All of our actions have the property that is, limit columns by view. So that will give you all of the views available in the list. And a good thing is that out of the box templates come with views built in. So if you use a template like here, a list from a template like Asset Manager, you can see I already have Asset Manager views that I get out of the box. So that's one of the ways we suggest Power Apps. We are working with them. There's a whole effort that we will start probably next early calendar year on how to really support large lists with Power Apps. There's a lot of things we can do there, and one of the things will be about views. One of the things will be about how you are able to select index column versus non-index column, and how that applies to filter and sorting views. There's a lot of stuff in Power Apps that we have that we need to start working on. But that is when I would see this would get accounted for as well.
I think that's it then. You actually went through all of the pending questions, which is great. And we are anyway running out of time. Thank you, Chaks, for the updates on that one.